Hello, Mary Tonkin.
Hello, Richard Morecroft. Good afternoon.
Great to talk with you. Mary, your exhibition is Ramble at Whitehorse Art Space at Box Hill Town Hall. Also, as we'll talk about a little bit later, there are other locations for the exhibition and for the works, but at the moment it's at Whitehorse Art Space at Box Hill Town Hall. Let's begin by looking at the way in which you relate to the environment when you paint, because your paintings are created almost entirely en plein air, even when they're as enormous as the ones we're going to hear about shortly. Why is that? Why is that the method you've chosen?
Oh, very simply, Richard, it's where I'm most alive, most comfortable. I grew up in the bush and I'm most comfortable there, and it's where my whole nerve endings are most open, where I'm most alive and receptive. So it's where I feel I paint best. So yes, outside, it's good.
So outside is great, but that means that you often have to take very large canvases into presumably fairly natural bush situations and try to deal with the mechanics of that. Is it so important that that trade-off has to occur?
Yeah, that's not such a big drama, really. I mean, it's a curse because things can be heavy and you swipe past a fern and paint wipes off, or there's sometimes windy days and just ticks and leeches. But it is just, you are so immersed and so sensually alive outside, or for me, it's critical. Yeah, I don't think it's critical. I don't think it's critical to anyone's painting generally, but I think it's quite important for the subject or the content of what I'm trying to say as well. It's about being present, and that's where I'm most present.
It's very much what you do, and certainly when I look at your works, I also imagine you, I guess, kind of battling your way into the bush with canvases and paint and trying to set up there. Actually, I remember seeing some film of David Hockney a few years ago, trying to do some of his very large plein air landscape paintings. Of course, he actually had virtually a servant holding his canvases down on the easel when it was a bit windy. I'm assuming you don't quite have the servant, unfortunately.
No, or the kids that bring them out like Monet did. Monet's kids would carry his canvases out for him, swap every hour or something. No, but who knows? Early days for training. Clara, shush. Sorry, my dog's barking. Shush you. Come here. Clara, come here.
An interview participant. Maybe he or she could become part of the interview. But look, take us to the place that you paint, because many of your works, and certainly the ones we're going to talk about today, are painted in a particular location that's very dear to you and very familiar to you. Tell us where it is.
So it's a parcel of land that my dad rented from, he took over the lease from his father when he came back from the Second World War, and he rented it for 50 years and until he passed away, and then Mum bought it shortly after. And it's a flower and bulb farm in the middle of what is now National Park. So it's a clearing with bush around it, and it's wet sclerophyll bush, so tree ferns and a bit of mountain ash, mostly stringy bark. Thick undergrowth, gorgeous lush bush. And the joy is that there's the open area, but there's a lot of bush that I can just disappear into and leave my things there. I don't need to pack up, and I'm safe and I'm private and I'm not going to be bothered by people. So
it's a very familiar space. It's got family connections for you, and it sounds as though you actually know or have come to know the space quite intimately. It's a very, very familiar locale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Don't worry, you're going to get
lost. I wanted to jump into the big work, which is the feature of this exhibition at Whitehorse Art Space, but is also going to be travelling to various other locations, and that is the work entitled Ramble, Kalorama. And that in a sense allows us to be immersed in the entirety of this location. How does that happen? First of all, tell us how big it is.
It's 18.9 metres, 180 centimetres high and 18.9 long. It's stupidly big. And how it happens? Well, I had, over maybe 10 years, Richard, I had a sense that I wanted to make something episodic, something that... so when you go into the bush, you're not... you can look at find an image amongst that stuff. You can find a tree or a form or relationship of forms that makes an image. But that's a different thing to conveying the episodic experience you have when you're walking through, or even when you're standing there, that you remember something you've seen or you glimpse something out of the corner of your eye. There's this kind of complex, it's a complex experience. It's sensually laden and all of your senses are alert, but it's visually, it's not direct like that. It's not a single point of view. And I've used multiple points of view many times, but I've felt like I wanted to get an episodic sense that you have to walk through it or spend time with the work and walk along it to experience it in much the same way as in a temporal way that you do when you're in the bush.
As you say, it's episodic. It's not actually a panorama in that literal sense of going from one point of view and then swinging continuously around. Over 18 metres in length, how many actual painted panels did it take to create that entire work? It's
21 panels. So, 21.
Give us a sense
sorry, Richard. I was just going to say this has come out of that spot I've been working on and off over for many years, and I've done a large drawing there, so a drawing that was maybe 15 metres as well, a large charcoal drawing of that scale, so of that same height and almost the same length. So and I made that drawing and I looked at it and thought, wow, I'd really like to make a painting, but I'm not sure whether I could do it, and that's sort of stupidly big, because in a drawing you can. When you're doing something episodic like that, you're painting something, then you're trying to push another image up against it, and getting those two to weave together, you can do very easily in a drawing. You don't have the way I draw anyway, you don't have the kind of tonal issues, marrying it tonally or the colour. You can just sort of push things against each other much more easily. And I put off making a painting, this is several years ago, and then I did make another pencil drawing and put it aside thinking, it was about 70 centimetres high and 5 or 6 metres long, and I scaled it up thinking if I made that height that I'd like, then it'd be this long. But no, that's stupid. And sort of put it aside and thought, you can't make a painting that stupidly big. And then a friend asked for a painting for a show, and I'd liked the last part of the drawing, and I thought, okay, I'll make a painting of this last 2 panels. And so I made that, and then I said to her, you can't sell it because I think it's the end of this painting. And then I went back to the start and just sort of worked through it. It sort of gave me a sense of confidence that I could deal with that scale and maybe make a painting.
Was that drawing, that first large drawing you were referring to, was that the one that was in the Dobell Drawing Prize some years back?
Yes. Yeah.
It was a spectacular work.
Thanks, Richard. There was another one before that, but yes, that was the Dobell one was in the same spot as this, so it's kind of nice.
You were mentioning just a little while ago, you made reference to colours, and one of the things that I think would be really interesting to hear is what your relationship to developing the palette or the palettes that you use has been. Because as people who may be familiar with your work will know, the colours which you use to render those bush environments, while the bush environments are very much real and accessible and recognisable, the colours are not just the naturalistic colours. How do you choose the types of palettes you use?
It's very much just instinct, Richard. It's coming from the drawing, when I'm making drawings, I might get a sense of what colour is implied in the drawing or what colour I feel it needs to be. I'm trying to use colour to convey that whole sensual envelope of being there, your emotional response, what's going on internally, how it feels, which I don't think sometimes, but well, I don't do it very well, but I don't think the local colour, the colour that you're actually see, you know, is physically there or naturalistically there, is necessarily conveys that. It doesn't have that kind of metaphoric power necessarily. So that's why, but how I develop it, just start and it sort of figure it out. Yeah. So sometimes the drawings imply it, but generally it's just something that evolves with the work. So it's you know, really is quite instinctive. It's coming out of what I'm feeling, and it just develops as the work develops, and my you know, the content sort of makes itself clear.
But nevertheless, and I'd like you to explore this a little bit more, because I think anybody who is familiar with, and again, we would urge the viewer to go and have a look at the website, not only of Box Hill Town Hall, but also your gallery, Australian galleries, where many of your works are visible. The viewer would be able to sense that you have a very identifiable palette. You know, you could see a painting and go, oh yes, that's clearly Mary Tonkin's colours. Even though they range across quite a varied range. How did you develop over time the sense of the sort of colours that you use? Tough question. It wasn't meant to be a tough question, but I was just really curious, because it does look as though it's something that's evolved very, you know, very much as a sense of your visual identity.
You know, I think it's just coming out of the way I'm working. I am working in quite local colour at the moment, actually, quite heavy greens, which I haven't done for a long time, which is odd for me, but I've just, for I think the situation that's going on, I'm just feeling like I need that kind of grounding and quietness. I don't know. It's just, really experience. They do come out of the experience. For instance, I've made some very black paintings. I went through a period of grief where no other colours other than the black, quite dark palettes. I tried so many times to use a different palette, and only the darker ones came together. So it really is depending on what's going on internally and in my life. And yeah, I think it's just responsive.
Yes. Let's go to a couple of the other works in the Art Space exhibition. One of, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Margaret?
Margaret, yep.
Margaret.
Mother in Spain, yeah.
And that is really a single tree, in a sense, or a focus on a single particular tree. Tell us a little about that tree and your relationship with it.
Oh, she's beautiful. Well, I was wandering through, I spend a lot of time wandering and looking for subject matter if I'm not sort of into something. And I was wandering along and came down the side of a gully, and it sits on the edge of a gully. It's quite a steep gully, and I just saw it and said Madre, which is Spanish for mother, of course, and it just had that really powerful presence. It embraced the whole bank. It's just a massive old, I think, regnans, and when you stand at its roots, it just wraps itself around you. It's a big mother.
Do you develop, because you spend so much time with them, relationships with individual trees in Kalorama?
I would say so, yeah. Just, I mean, that one I have to say is now past. It's finally died. It was a very old tree and it had lost its top, 50 or 100 years ago, but it was still alive when I made that painting. It has since died. It's just a skeleton, well, still standing and still solid, but starting to decay now.
How does it feel? How does it feel when you're in that environment? It's clearly a working environment for you, but as you say, it seems to help you feel alive and aware. How would you describe the feelings when you go into this very familiar place? You go back into it again, perhaps having been away for a little while.
It's returning home. It really is a home. a solace and home. I can just open into it. A lot of people describe being uncomfortable in the Australian bush or feeling slightly uneasy or frightened. I don't have that at all, especially in this home. I just feel embraced. It's lovely.
Let's just turn to the exhibition and the fact that, as we've said, it's on in Box Hill Town Hall at the moment. There was a little bit of an interruption to its showing due to coronavirus restrictions, but it's now showing at the moment, and we're in the second week of June as we record this interview. But it's going somewhere after that, and then I believe at some stage, possibly even next year, it's coming to Sydney. Can you give us a sense of this exhibition on the move?
Yes, it's going to Burringer in Upwey, and I'm not quite sure, those dates are a bit shifting at the moment, so I'm not sure when, but possibly early next year, and then in mid next year in Sydney, so Australian Galleries in June or July 2021.
So all of the images for this exhibition, some of them are actually available on the Whitehorse Art Space website. And just a reminder for the viewer that the idea with the interviews that we're recording in this exhibition series is to be able to go to the website, to find the images and to look at the images at the same time as listening to the conversation. And in this case, certainly some of them are there on the Whitehorse Art Space website, but also if you go to the Australian Galleries website, then all of Mary's images and all of the works that we're talking about are also available there to be found, and no doubt even more so when the exhibition happens in Sydney next year. Let's go just very slightly sideways, and although they're not part of the exhibition that is presently showing, there are sculptural works that you have exhibited in recent years at the same time as your paintings. Are they also from Kalorama?
Yes, yep, still made in that bush, yes.
And can you describe them for people who may not have seen them?
Yeah, they're shallow relief ceramic sculptures, so they feel like a drawing medium to me. It's a new drawing medium that I'm playing with. So they're just quite shallow. I've got one in behind. Shallow relief. Can
you grab it and show us, if that's easy?
Yeah.
Because I think it would be nice to get a sense of that three-dimensionality and the sense of how that shallow relief works. So yes, if you can move that, we can see the depth. And Mary, if you wouldn't mind just talking a bit so we make sure that we see you rather than me.
It's a porcelain paper clay, which is amazingly versatile and mouldable. And you can paint some natural forms, paint slip on them and make that work. Or I'm understanding now that you can pre-fire a form and pop it into the greenware and it will fire. So it's an exciting new medium.
Incredibly delicate and fragile by the look of it, but yeah, also I'm going to put it down somewhere safe. Is it safe?
Yes.
Okay, great. Incredibly delicate and fragile and beautiful, and in a sense, literally, physically, like having some of the floor of the forest right physically in front of you.
Yeah, it's kind of wonderful experience of using it, because if you're painting, you're translating what you're seeing, but this it's a new way of sort of feeling into the forms, like you're moulding them and making them, and it just adds a whole layer of understanding and experience to it. And I think they read differently too. I'm interested in how drawings, my pencil drawings anyway, sort of sink back, the paintings come out of the viewer, and these sit in some space in between that. I think those the way they inhabit a viewer space is quite interesting too.
It's a very interesting parallel, I think, when you say that they feel to you almost like drawings, looking at that white object with the subtlety of the line and shadow and so on within it. It is, in a sense, like looking at a three-dimensional drawing. It's a beautiful thing.
Mm.
Let's look to the future a little. And I know, as you've explained, you have a tremendous sense of connection with and immersion in this bush that you're very familiar with. But as you look to future works, is there a sense in which you might map that biodiversity even more in terms of the images that you might create? I've read somewhere that you might consider doing that visually with both the insect life and the leeches, as well as some of the more obvious plant and tree life.
Yes, I had a plan to, and I may still go ahead with it, but just to map the actual biodiversity of the area where I'm working. If I'm working in the same area over a period of time. Essentially to get my kids and their two friends who are just this beautiful 9-year-olds, all 9 or 10-year-olds, just naturalists, and just get them to understand what the local flora and fauna is, and to enrich my understanding of that whole experience too. Coming from the experience of working with the AWC in Queensland, and just seeing their lists at their sanctuary of all the flora and fauna, and just familiarity is caring. You don't care about the tree unless you know what it is. So just in that vein, just understanding more about that. I don't know how that would work in terms of the work. I was thinking it might go around the edge as a list or just be an addendum. But yes, just a little nice side project.
You mentioned the AWC. I presume that's the Australian Wildlife Conservancy.
Yes.
And in a project that's organised largely through Defiance Gallery in Sydney, you were part of a trip to an AWC property in Queensland. Can you just briefly tell us the sort of experiences you had through that trip?
It was wonderful. So they looked after us very royally. The trip is to go and make some work and exhibit next year, well, this year, but don't know whether it'll be this year. And they just fed us beautifully, looked after us, showed us all their programs, and explained what they're doing and the importance of the work, which is just wonderful. And took us on helicopter trips, and we had a splendid time. But that organisation is so fabulous, just science-driven environmental research and care, broad-scale land management, and getting rid of weeds and pests. And they do a lot of, not at this property, but other properties do a lot of feral pest fencing so that native mammals have a chance to survive and reproduce. It's just wonderful, wonderful work.
And the works that will be eventually exhibited by you and other participating artists will then raise funds for the Australian Wildlife Conservancy and their conservation work. So the Queensland location that you went to, what sort of country was that?
That property changes from a little bit of rainforest to wet sclerophyll right down to dry sclerophyll and spinifex. So it's a broad area. We were camped, and I worked near a bit that was dry sclerophyll, so dry eucalypt forest, quite open, much more open than our bush, with xanthorrhea grasses and just quite open bush, and very beautiful in that they do fuel reduction burns, fuel reduction burns for fire for conservation management, and you have lots of lovely regrowth and dark forms of little bits that have been burnt. And yes, it's very different to ours, but beautiful.
How did you find yourself responding to an environment that was different to Kalorama, with which you are so familiar?
I loved it, Richard. I have my usual response. I could go and live there. But I think the issue for me about making work in a different environment is that I take so long, and part of a lot of the content of my work is the relationship I have with it. So having time to build up that and know it intimately is quite important. So I always feel like I need to move here and do work for a few years, then I might know what I'm doing. So yeah, I did fall in love with it, though. It's heavenly landscape. They took us on these helicopter trips over gorges. You come down these gorges lined with pines, native pines, and beautiful waterfalls and rock pools, and it's just divine. And what made me sort of boggles your mind is that our country's full of places like that no one ever goes. You know, there's these extraordinary places that there's no one else. We just don't know our land.
Well, if people go to see your work, particularly the huge Ramble Kalorama, Kalorama. I almost called it calamari. The Ramble Kalorama, then they certainly will have a much greater and more intimate sense of knowledge of the landscape. But Mary Tonkin, thank you for sharing your exhibition with us.
My pleasure, Richard Morecroft. Thank you.